The year was 1905, and America was rapidly becoming a modern industrial power. New factories were opening in the cities, railways were expanding, and trade was growing rapidly. But behind this shining progress, the lives of workers were far from safe. Large machines operated, steam boilers powered the factories, and safety regulations were limited. In such an era, even a small technical failure could cause a major disaster. And in 1905, America witnessed two terrible disasters that would be difficult to forget. The first disaster happened on land, where a factory was reduced to rubble within minutes. The second disaster occurred on the vast waters of Lake Superior, where a violent storm became a deadly enemy for ships. The first disaster was the terrible and tragic Grover Shoe Factory disaster, and no one knew what was about to happen. On the morning of March 20, 1905, in Brockton, Massachusetts, the danger was already approaching. Brockton was well known for its shoe factories, but danger was already present. Thousands of people in the city went to different factories every day for work. This was their everyday life. One of these factories was the Grover Shoe Factory, where a large number of workers were carrying on with their daily work. It was a 4-story building, and work was proceeding as usual inside, but the danger was growing. No one had any idea that within minutes everything would change and the situation would turn catastrophic. Steam was used to operate machinery and heat the building, allowing the factory's work to continue. A large coal-fired boiler had been installed to generate this steam, but danger was close. But that morning, this boiler was about to suddenly become a terrible danger, and the situation began to deteriorate. At around 7:50 in the morning, a powerful explosion erupted inside the factory, and the situation turned catastrophic. The boiler had exploded, and the blast violently shook the entire structure of the building, while the danger continued to escalate. The explosion was so powerful that part of the building suddenly began collapsing, and the situation grew worse. The workers inside the factory barely had time to react before the danger rapidly intensified. Some people were injured by the blast, while many others became trapped beneath the rubble as cries filled the factory. But the disaster did not end there, because within minutes the fire began spreading and the situation became even worse. The entire wooden building quickly became engulfed in flames, and panic spread among the people outside. Only minutes earlier it had been a busy workplace. Now it was filled with smoke, fire, and chaos. People began gathering outside, but reaching those trapped inside was extremely difficult as the situation continued to worsen. The rubble was heavy, machinery was buried beneath it, and flames were spreading everywhere, but people continued their rescue efforts. People began removing the rubble with their hands and whatever tools were available, continuing the rescue effort. But in 1905, modern rescue machines and advanced emergency equipment like those available today did not exist, making the situation even more difficult. Every passing minute became critically important for those trapped inside, while the danger continued to increase. There was still hope that some people beneath the rubble were alive, so the rescue effort continued. The fire and smoke above continued to grow, leaving less time for rescue, but the efforts continued. After considerable effort, the fire was gradually brought under control, allowing the rescue work to continue. Afterward, rescuers began removing people trapped beneath the rubble, but the danger was still present. As bodies were brought out, the true scale of the disaster became clear, leaving the gathered people in shock. Ultimately, 58 people died in the disaster and around 150 were injured, leaving the city in mourning. In a single morning, the lives of dozens of families had been completely changed, leaving behind immense grief. Many of those who had left home for work that morning never returned, leaving families devastated. But the Brockton disaster did not remain merely a local tragedy. It raised serious questions across the United States. This raised a major question about industrial safety across America, and an answer was urgently needed. If one boiler could destroy an entire factory, the question was how safe the other factories really were. At that time, America was industrializing rapidly, but safety standards were not advancing at the same pace, leaving serious risks behind. New machines were arriving, but safety systems were not strong enough to match them, and the risks continued to grow. The Grover Shoe Factory disaster sparked serious discussions about boiler safety and the need for stronger regulations. People began asking who would protect the lives of workers and who should be held responsible for their safety. The need for better industrial safety and boiler standards became increasingly clear, and demands for change grew stronger. But the story of 1905 was not over, because another disaster struck in November, bringing danger once again. Now the story moves from the land to America's vast Lake Superior, where the situation would change dramatically. Lake Superior was the largest of the Great Lakes and looked almost like an inland sea. At that time, large ships carrying heavy cargo regularly traveled its waters, keeping an important trade network moving. Ships carried iron ore, lumber, grain, and other essential essential goods from one place to another. But the weather on Lake Superior could be extremely dangerous and change suddenly, creating a major threat to ships. Especially in late November, strong winds and heavy snow could become dangerous, leaving ships trapped in severe conditions. On November 27, 1905, the weather began deteriorating and the winds grew stronger, causing conditions to rapidly worsen. Conditions deteriorated rapidly, and ships on the lake began struggling as the storm intensified. The Weather Bureau issued a warning, but many ships were already on the lake, and the danger had grown considerably. Among those ships was the Mataafa, whose journey was soon about to take a terrible turn. On November 27, the Mataafa departed from Duluth with a barge in tow. The barge was named James Naismith, and at first the voyage appeared normal, but danger was already approaching. But after some time, the wind became so strong that controlling the ship became extremely difficult, and conditions worsened. The waves grew higher, icy winds swept across the lake, visibility decreased, and the danger continued to increase. By nightfall, Lake Superior had become a vast and dangerous storm, leaving ships trapped in the violent conditions. It became too difficult for the Mataafa to continue forward, so the captain decided to turn back. The greatest challenge now was reaching Duluth Harbor safely through the storm and saving the ship. Towering waves surrounded the ship, strong winds battered it, and the route was difficult to see, but the journey continued. Even so, the Mataafa slowly continued back toward Duluth as the conditions kept changing. After some time, the harbor became visible, and the crew believed the ship might finally be safe. But Lake Superior had not yet delivered its most dangerous blow, and disaster was still ahead. A massive wave pushed the Mataafa toward the pier, leaving the ship stranded. Shortly afterward, the ship broke into two sections, making the situation extremely dangerous. Now the forward section of the ship was separated from the rear section. Thousands of people stood along the shore watching the horrifying scene as the situation continued to deteriorate. They wanted to help, but the raging waters of Lake Superior stood between them and the stranded sailors. The night grew colder, freezing winds continued, and waves repeatedly crashed against the broken ship as the danger increased. For those trapped aboard the ship, protecting themselves from the freezing cold became increasingly difficult as conditions worsened. Some of the sailors lit fires inside to keep themselves warm, but the danger remained. But conditions for the sailors trapped in the rear section continued to deteriorate, and hope began to fade. The next morning, the weather became somewhat calmer, allowing rescue crews to finally reach the ship and begin the rescue. Many people were rescued, but some sailors had lost their lives, leaving behind grief and tragedy. And the most important fact was that the Mataafa was not the only ship caught in the disaster. Across Lake Superior, many ships fell victim to the terrible storm, and the damage continued to grow. In total, 29 ships were destroyed or severely damaged, and 36 sailors lost their lives. The disaster raised serious questions about navigation safety on Lake Superior, making improvements necessary. Ships especially needed safer guidance near the North Shore, where dangerous conditions posed a serious threat. During severe weather, the rocky coastline was extremely dangerous for ships, and accidents occurred there. Because of this need, plans were eventually developed for the construction of Split Rock Lighthouse, improving navigation safety. In 1910, Split Rock Lighthouse was completed and became an important navigational aid for ships. Today, the site is a beautiful historic landmark, but its story began with a painful history of maritime disasters. Behind it remained the memory of the storm that took the lives of many sailors and left lasting grief. When we look at both disasters of 1905, one thing becomes clear above everything else: safety mattered. America was advancing rapidly, but its safety systems were not developing at the same speed. The Grover factory disaster exposed the weakness of industrial safety, while the storm demonstrated the overwhelming power of nature. On one side were powerful machines, and on the other was a sea-like lake with dangerous weather, leaving humans vulnerable. Both disasters played an important role in making America recognize the importance of safety, gradually changing public thinking. It was necessary to understand that true progress was not simply about building factories and expanding trade. Protecting the lives of workers and sailors was equally important, and that was the real lesson. Because no matter how advanced technology becomes, without safety it remains incomplete, and that is the truth. These events of 1905 revealed the bitter human cost behind America's industrial progress, and history remains a witness. The people who lost their lives in these disasters were not merely statistics. They were beloved members of families.